Welcome to Are You Local, a podcast about identity, self, and finding one's place away from home. My name is George, and I have been in Singapore for the past 9 years. It's been my home since 2012. I moved to Singapore a few years ago to further my career in broadcasting. My first job was to work for a local broadcaster, and then I ended up working for a cable channel. And after that, I got to work for a tech company. It was just, it's been my home for the past 9 years. In the past 9 years, I've met wonderful people, and one of them happens to be my friend, Greg. Greg, hello. Thank you for joining today's podcast.
Hi, nice to be here.
Self-introduction. Who is Greg?
Greg is Greg. Okay, so I guess I'm not really like someone who likes to talk about me, but if I were to say something about what I do, it's just that I love geek culture and being involved in that universe where it's like current and fresh and that translates to what I do in my work. So I am a graphic designer by trade and education. And now I have a career switch and I'm a tabletop board game producer or assistant producer for the time being, because it's a transition to a new industry for me, which is something that happened during this new era of a pandemic.
Greg, you started in this job this fairly recently in 2021. And this, to our listeners, this is actually our second recording. This is the second time me and Greg are recording. I asked him to re-record this episode with me because I was supposed to launch this podcast 8 months ago. But I can't thank him enough. So in the past 8 months, since we last recorded the first episode, Greg started in this new job. And in this new workplace that you're in, is it multicultural? Are there people from different parts of the world in this company with you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I get to meet people from all around. I work with a multiracial team, so I think every race is represented fairly in this company.
When I created this podcast, it's as I mentioned in the very beginning, it's about identity, self, and finding one's place away from home. And this is born from a story about me getting into a taxi or getting into taxis in general when I'm in Singapore. And whenever I start speaking with the driver or they start asking questions, they would always ask me like,
"Where are you from? Are you local?
Where are you from?" In the beginning, it was fun to answer, to tell them that, oh, I'm Filipino. And then, it just became repetitive. It's like they kept asking which part of the Philippines. And then, some drivers, it was fine. But I got a little irritated. Even most of them probably meant well. Singapore has been my home for years and years. And here I am still being asked this question. Sometimes I want to respond simply, I'm from Pasir Ris. I am Filipino. I'm proud of that. I'm Filipino American. I'm proud of that too. But yeah, so that's why I came up with this podcast. So it's a way for me to have conversations with people from all around the world to ask how they're doing, integrating into that country, what's their definition of being local. And I've had a couple interesting conversations, which I'm excited to share in the next few episodes. Now we go to Greg, who is Singaporean. My question for you, Greg, is that imagine aliens landed on Earth. Imagine if aliens landed on Earth and the first person they meet is you. And after you get through all the pleasantries, explaining male, female, explaining LGBTQ, all of that, then they ask you, what is a Singaporean? They ask you, what is a Singaporean? How would you explain Singaporean to an alien?
That is a lot to unpack. Okay. Let me try and contextualize this. So I am the first Singaporean that an alien meets. After explaining everything that I know, they ask me what a Singaporean is. I guess I would have to say a Singaporean is like any other person on this planet, except that we are born in a society which is more stringent, more strict, and also, amongst everything, multicultural. And I think that is a word that it rings true, because no matter where you go in Singapore, it is not truly a singular identity. I think in recent years, especially in Singapore's context, we've had a lot of well, not say recent years, but also recent months. We've had a lot of interesting uh incidents to challenge the notion of multiculturalism and multiracialism in Singapore. Um, but among everything that has happened, I think there is one thing that is undeniable, and that is Singapore is a country that has a lot of culture. You see it in our food, you see it in our communities, you see it in our HDB blocks. I think there are communities that they may lean a certain way to a certain culture, but it is never 100% because the fact of the matter is in Singapore, nothing here belongs to anyone because everything is everyone's. We have laws here that are colonial. They're still kind of a little bit colonial from our colonial times. And then we also have practices and cultures that are intermingled within each other's. So you have, for example, you can't go to a coffee shop, right, and only see one type of dish. You will see multiple
Mm-hmm.
kinds of stores selling dishes from different kinds of groups. Even if let's say they are, so we have a majority race in Singapore of Chinese, but it doesn't always translate that way in terms of when you go out into the society. So you'll see like a store selling prata or mutabab or tosi, which is an Indian stall, usually Indian Muslim, and halal. And then you have a store that's tzucha, which sells like mixed dishes that you can order and it's cooked fresh. And then of course you have cai peng and nasi padang, which are also their own versions of ready-made dishes that are ready for you to pick and order and put on rice. And then you have like the Mee Rebus Mi Soto Ayam Penyet stalls, which also have an Indonesian flair. You have I could go on forever and ever. Like this topic of food is just that's my life. I love food. But that's the thing, right? And of course when you walk on and you see more things, you start to see that younger culture in Singapore, especially youth culture in Singapore, is a lot more multicultural than it used to be in the past, which is really interesting because you also start to see a lot more multiracial families and children growing up in a different kind of mindset from their parents' generation. And I love that because it's like even my own god kids, they are Malay, Indian, Chinese, and Nigerian. They are all four races in one. And they are beautiful kids and they are so smart. And I'm glad that they actually get to grow up in a society where they can learn more about all the cultures, not just one of them, because here we have everything, and they can learn and understand every part of themselves and where they come from. Because in Singapore, there's a place for every single kind of race.
It's being in Singapore for 9 years. It's what someone would ask me, "What's my favorite thing about Singapore?" I will say that it's the multicultural society that it is. What could be better though?
What could be better? I think a lot of things, and this isn't just in Singapore, right? This is in any country that has more than one type of culture. Is listening, because a lot of the times when you go out into, say for instance, what you've experienced, right, with the taxi ride, sometimes people hold their own prejudices. It is of not their fault. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's their own preconceived notions and the understanding where it comes from. So as a minority in Singapore myself, I would say that a lot of the things that I get told from time to time is, "Oh, you're Indian? You're very different for an Indian." And that's usually a red flag when it comes to conversations. So, it's always kind of like, what do you mean? Like, but you see, that's the thing, right? Like in my head, I can have two responses here. I can go, what do you mean for an blank race, right? Because it could apply to any race. It couldn't just be to myself. But the thing is, the second thing I have to ask is, so they have a preconceived notion of what they think that someone who has my skin tone or my background culturally, ethnically, um, is set in stone. Maybe that can be changed, who knows? But the idea is that understanding that first is very important. sometimes people get really angry and flustered and they just go through, this is an attack on me, right? And understanding that, yes, it's valid because you feel, oh, but I'm more than that. Or sometimes they feel, what's wrong with that? Because there can be two angles. It can be like, are you attacking my identity or are you attacking my cultural background of where I belong? Sometimes it's a combination of two because people identify as that. So the idea is like trying to understand what that relates to you first and then what that relates to the other. Because half the time, this misunderstanding comes from a place where the person isn't actively trying to hurt you. They're just trying to communicate or understand you. And sometimes it comes from a place where they don't actually, they're not thinking before they say it. And then when it comes out, then it sounds wrong, right? And that's when, they're either ignorant or they're trying to be specifically hurtful. And trying to navigate that is easier than trying to navigate the previous one.
I like the way that you put. I love the way that you put that, because going back to my taxi ride example, probably it's been my point of view evolved, I guess. No, not evolve. What's the opposite of evolve? It basically
Devolved.
it evolved. It was from answering it in a nice positive way, it sort of became defensive for me. Like, here I am explaining I'm from the Philippines to this driver, but in looking back, or in hindsight, I feel that maybe 99% of these drivers meant well. They probably were just curious. They've been driving the whole day for 15 hours, probably, and then no one's talking with them. So they just wanted to strike a conversation with no harm. And that is that. As I go into this podcast, into more episodes, I'll probably peel off the layers of what it is and also discover myself. Who am I? I myself have a mixed background. I was born in the States. I'm an Asian American in the States. When I'm in the Philippines, I'm the guy with the American accent who's Filipino American or Filipino. When I'm in Singapore, I'm a minority. So I'm trying to figure these things out, and hopefully with the conversations that I have with the folks that I'm guesting here. For you, what is the Singaporean's best characteristic, Greg?
Is food a characteristic?
Oh,
No, just,
I'll say food,
I,
but if anyone from Malaysia is listening to this, won't that start some type of debate?
I I I think that's a whole other can of worms. But I would just like to say that I think one of the things that Singaporeans have that's very unique to us, right, is the fact that you could walk out and from the get go, you'll just see a neighborhood of different people, different kinds of people. Just I mean, and I'm talking about okay, maybe this is an exclusive thing to heartlands, right? But that's basically 70% of our population, 80% of our population. You can't walk out of your home and not feel like you live in a country that only has like maybe like one predominant type of person or race or culture. Like everywhere you go, you'll see something different. I think one good thing about that is learning that, oh, in one way or another, there's always an other. And sometimes we will see ourselves as the other, but then all around us, we're thinking the same as well. We are the other, but then there's always another. So trying to understand that everyone is an other and we are all different, but in at the heart of it, we're just all people that want to learn to live together and understand each other's differences. Sometimes people call it tolerance, but I think when people start to understand and open up and listen more to each other, I think that's when it becomes acceptance. And I think we need a lot more of that in Singapore and anywhere else in the world. Of course, definitely everywhere. Any kind of minority or majority population definitely needs to have acceptance at some point in time, whether we achieve it or not. That's an aspiration. But let's start with tolerance first and then education.
That said, we have unconscious biases that I'm trying to unlearn as well. What if I've been carrying some of these and I'd like to be called out as well? I don't want to just preach about LGBTQ rights and myself, be discriminating against my own community. So that's what this podcast is also about, challenging unconscious biases that we may have with other people's identities, other people, unconscious biases that we have, prejudice over race and identity.
Yeah,
But
I think that's a good thing to talk about, honestly, because I think in recent weeks, especially since we just had Pride in Singapore, there's a lot more light shined on minority communities in the LGBTQIA plus community here. Even the brown queers community and brown community in Singapore. I think because of recent incidents, especially that incidents that talk about race, multiculturalism, incidents that talk about um, the right to be proud of being different in a society which is so different, and how that's being taken into question from people who are conservative slash ignorant, because they fall on a spectrum. It's not the same people, um, and trying to say, hey, let us tell you how it feels like. I think that conversation needs to be had more often. And there are a lot of people that are stepping forward to have those conversations, and I really enjoy them. And I look forward to listening to them on podcasts, on live stream, and also in journal forms on social media.
intersectionality, is that the right term? Right?
Yeah, definitely. I try not to involve my biasness. I feel whenever there's a need to bring it up, and I actively try to remember this myself, because I'm a single child, so I don't really have like a close family member person or someone that I can relate to around my age in my immediate household to have conversations like this. So I talk to myself a lot sometimes, and sometimes I reason with myself of why I think about a certain thing in a certain way, and sometimes I you know I have to ask myself, why do I feel like that, or why do I feel like this when someone says that to me, and I have to think about it. I have to like take a pause. And I think not a lot of people do that sometimes, because a lot of times people act on instinct, and that's from my own experiences. Maybe other communities could be different, but in my own experiences, people like to act on instinct. And when people act on instinct, half the time it's usually a very quick decision being made about something on the spot, versus a, like having enough time to have developed a preconceived notion on how to react to a situation that could go one way or another. So I've had the experience to know how, some topics of conversation that can get really heated, because we live in a very closed knit society, in a sense that we kind of live on top of each other. I mean, our basic housing is like that, stacked, even in private sector and condominiums and stuff, right? So trying to understand who these people are around you and how you can coexist with them is very important. And I think that's something that, is kind of part of being local. You can't just exist as a single person in Singapore. You have to exist as a society. Because if you try to exist singularly here in Singapore, it's not gonna work unless you really can self-sustain every single part of your life. Um, but no, it's not gonna work. In society like this, you definitely need to learn to get along with each other.
That's beautiful. And remains to be, if I'm in Singapore for my 10th year next year, 2022, it is my favorite thing about being in Singapore. Over the next few weeks, we'll hear from people in New York, Dubai, Barcelona, Hong Kong, and many more about the definition of being local. Thank you so much for joining today's episode, Greg.
It's been a pleasure.